How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another Pioneer tier list video. Thanks for checking out the content here on this channel. I make Magic the Gathering content full-time over on my Twitch at twitch.tv/darthjacen, as well as here on this YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, really helps me out, and only about 30% of the people who watch these videos week in and week out are actually subscribed. This week, we're going to start once again with the D tier. The FMN tier decks will be listed in the description down below. So if you're interested in the decks that did qualify for this week's tier list but are below our competitive scale, feel free to look at those decks in the description down below. First up, we have Mono White Humans. This is a deck that has continued to show up with more and more frequency, especially in the leagues, but in the challenges, we haven't really seen it have the same level of prevalence. However, it did show up in a couple of prelims. I think the deck is quite strong, along with another D tier deck, both of which just need a little bit more presence in the challenges, and I think both have the potential to move up. Next up, we have Abzan Greasefang. This is a deck that I played this week on stream, went 4-1 with, and it felt much better than some of the other variants of Greasefang have in the past. I think this deck has a lot of potential, especially the builds that are running Witherbloom Command. I think this is a sleeper deck for people who want to play Greasefang, but are a little bit concerned about some of the interaction that decks have had against you. I still think Greasefang is a little bit on the weak side right now, but Abzan Greasefang was quite impressive, and I could see it moving up in the near future. Next up, we're going to jump right to that S tier. These are the decks that define the metagame. They are your most likely to be winning challenges or putting up top 8s, and if you either aren't playing this deck, then you need to be respecting it when considering your deck choices and your sideboarding options. For S tier, we have Rakdos Midrange. This has been a all-star for quite a while. Now that Mono Green has started to trend down in presence, we've finally had a place where Red Black Midrange can once again move above the rest of the format, with 8 top 16s this last weekend in the challenges. Rakdos Midrange continues to be a frontrunner in being able to put up first and second place results with different builds. Invoke Despair very well positioned right now, and we even saw Goblin Dark Dwellers getting a top finish this last weekend. Next up, we have the A tier decks. These are decks that I think have a high level of presence, especially at the top tiers, have good matchups against several of the other prevalent decks in the format, but for one reason or another, whether it's one particular matchup or just not being able to close out those top 8 conversions into wins, usually they tend to sit just below the S tier. First up, we have Is It Phoenix? This is a deck that's been performing quite well for the past couple of weeks. Last week we had Rakdos Midrange and Blue Red Phoenix together in A tier. This week with Rakdos putting up a first and second place finish, as well as 13 total finishes. It moved one step ahead, but Phoenix is still a bit above everything else with 11 total finishes, though in terms of challenges, it only put up 6, whereas the other A tier deck put up 5. So it seems like Phoenix is still settling into a position in the meta, being able to attack the creature decks, as well as many of the slower, more over-the-top decks, things like Mono Green Carn. One of the places where Phoenix does tend to struggle, though, is against Blue-White Control, as well as having a very close matchup with Rakdos Midrange, and as those matchups tend to shift towards more high-power spells and early aggression, it does become seemingly more slanted into Red-Black's favor, being able to continuously 2-for-1 while having a good clock. Next up, we have Blue-White Control, which put up 5 top 16s this last weekend. It did win the challenge on Sunday and seems to be pulling back into the position of using the 60 card variant as opposed to the 80 card Yorion, mainly to be able to have more reliable access to your important counter spells and other instants and sorceries that are able to swing some of the difficult matchups back in your favor. While Lotus Field and Mono Green Carn remain difficult matchups, having a consistently solid matchup against Rakdos Midrange and Is It Phoenix is a good place to be in the metagame right now. However, those matchups are still very contentious and require very tight lines, and you will find that if you play against well-tuned versions of, say, Rakdos Midrange with a good pilot, it can be very challenging, even though you do have the more scalable late game. Next up, we move down to the B tier, and we only have one single deck here this week. It is sort of the gatekeeper between those top echelon decks of S and A tier that are your most likely to be winning the events, down to your C and below tiers that are more likely to be top 16s. So for B tier, we have Mono Green Carn. After having one of its worst weekends in the last couple of months. 2 weekends ago was 0 top 32s in the whole weekend. This time, Mono Green Carn was able to put up 3 top 16s, a revival of sorts, including using Nicol Bolas as a slot in the deck with Oath of Nissa and Storm the Festival. Definitely an interesting take that I expect we'll see potentially more of moving into the next couple of weeks. But Mono Green Carn is able to attack red-black midrange, blue-white control, and while you struggle against Phoenix and you struggle against Heroic, there have been a lot of matchups that required people to warp their deck to fight you, and now that Mono Green isn't the top deck in the format, that should be a little bit less prevalent. Last up, we have the C tier. These are your decks that are going to be challenge top 16s. They're going to be in the metagame. You need to respect them or at least understand your plan against them. These decks tend to show up more in your prelims, definitely will show up at your local RCQs. First up, we have Boros Heroic. This is a deck that preys on some of the less interactive decks in the format by just going straight underneath you with powerful creatures and protection spells, as well as the addition of Illuminator Virtuoso, making it very easy to kill quickly. Next up, we have Jund Sacrifice, which managed to put up a better weekend than it has in quite some time, mainly due to its ability to grind out some of these mid-range matchups, and I think being able to go 1-for-1 with some of the various aggro decks that have continuously been getting beaten up by the higher tier decks, leverages it in a position that if you see decks like Heroic, decks like Humans, decks like Mono Blue Spirits, you're able to grind them out and then still have game against the other mid-range decks. Next up, we have Lotus Field Combo, which has been seeing a bit of a resurgence lately, especially as it has a good matchup against both of our A-tier decks, though previously it had a real problem with Mono Green Carn as well as some of the aggro decks like Heroic and Mono Red, but one of the ways it was able to work on the Mono Green Carn matchup was through additional copies of Natural State in the sideboard, extra Pasejus, as well as Pithing Needle to stop Carn the Great Creator. I think Lotus Field is a deck that is in a great position if the A tier moved to S tier, but with Rakdos midrange moving to a more aggressive build, it does lose some of its luster in trying to attack the top of the metagame. Next up, we have Rakdos Sacrifice. This build is the one without Onicult Anvil, using the Claim the Firstborn and Unlucky Witness to be able to grind out value alongside Ob Nixilis the Adversary. Making yourself better against the Carn decks has been a boon for this strategy, and being able to have a naturally favorable matchup against Rakdos midrange is a big reason that this deck continues to find success. Next up, we have Niftalite, the perennial mid-range killer, being able to go over the top of the other mid-range decks through your Niv, Mizzet Reborn, Bring to Light, and Tybalt Cosmic Imposter, along with various removal spells and wrath effects to help you deal with the aggro decks. While some of the aggro decks like Heroic are able to get under you, especially with a protection spell to stop key removal, this deck is especially well positioned against Rakdos midrange. However, I would caution against this deck if you run into Blue-Red Phoenix, though it can be very close. They are able to generally prevent your big key spells from resolving, leaving you in a position where they can take over the game while you search for your next bit of top end. Last up, we have 4-color Humans, and while I think Mono White Humans has a higher ceiling, I think this 4-color build that's been showing up is really well positioned right now at being able to attack the various decks by basically being the do anything deck. You can leverage tons of different effects to be able to customize your build if you want things like Hostage Taker, want things like Reflector Mage, etc., so that you can continually change up your strategy dependent on what cards fit the metagame and how best to attack it. It is a interesting take, and I'm happy to see that we've seen Bant Humans, Esper Humans, Orzhov Humans, Mono White Humans, 4-color Humans, 5-color Humans, Pyre Heroes coming back. We've seen a lot of the Humans decks, and much like the Greasefang decks, they sort of all sit in a very similar field between C and D tier, but right now I say 4-color Humans is a little bit better, but I think as the metagame evolves, I would expect Mono White Humans to be the more likely contender of the Humans decks alongside Bant Humans, but right now 4-color Humans is definitely an impressive deck, and I look forward to seeing if it can continue to find some level of success through its ability to be customized. There you have it. That's this week's tier list. Thanks everybody for watching. Shout out to all of my patrons, especially those who are on the tier 3 shown at the beginning and end of every YouTube video. Appreciate all your support. Until next time.